American Himalayan Foundation could not make it today, but Therese will be talking about both organizations and their great work. So today is International Women's Day, which started back in the early 1900s to promote civil rights for women. We've come a really long way in most respects, but human rights for women and girls in some corners of the world have not. I'm excited to introduce you to the work of Community Partners International and American Himalayan Foundation. They are doing amazing things on the ground to prevent girls from falling victim in Nepal, Burma, and Thailand. Therese Caouette is executive director at CPI and has worked with refugees, migrants, and displaced persons in Southeast Asia for more than 30 years, together with community-based organizations, international bodies, foundations, and academic institutions. Please welcome Therese.
Hello, thanks. As Aya said, I've been working largely in Southeast Asia. And I worked primarily in the beginning with refugees and displaced populations in the late 70s and early 80s, and the end of the Vietnam War. And during that time, I found, although I was working with refugees, I found that more and more young girls and young adults were finding themselves in very vulnerable situations outside of the refugee camps. And sorry, I thought that was for us. Sorry. But what I found in the when I started to do really specifically work on trafficking, I found that most of the people at that time in the early 90s or late 80s were being trafficked. I think the image, at least I had at the time, or I think people still have, of trafficking is people being abducted or tricked in their village, brought across borders and put into brothels, very typical brothels where you have, girls locked in and they have numbers on their chest, 1 through 25, and you go in and you pick which number you want. Now we saw that was very typical in the 80s and early 90s. But I think I've seen that it's changed dramatically in the last 10, 20 years, and I'd like to talk about that today because I feel that a lot of us have a very different, including myself, still have these other images of trafficking that are not what we see in the ground today. So I'd like to kind of walk through that, and I'd like to make this presentation more a presentation of a discourse or a discussion about trafficking, and not me telling you what trafficking is, because I think it's so nuanced and so complex that we're all really struggling to try to understand it and respond to it. So I'd like to kind of present to you the challenges that I find in my work and ask you to kind of think that through with me as you think about these issues and what you're aware of in other contexts. So I'd like to ask you, to maybe just turn to the person next to you, or because I know we have several people who are not here with us physically, to just think for a minute or two how you would define trafficking. How do you use it? And if you just turn to 2 or 3 people next to you and just try to figure out, what does it mean to you? What words do you use? How do you use trafficking? Just take 1 minute. I'll just do it real briefly. Okay, let me bring you back. I want to say that I think if we took a poll, we'd come up with a whole bunch of different images. And I think this is what I see in my work all the time. And I think it's not only a problem that I face. I think the international community, I keep saying I think, but I see that the international community is faced with these same dilemmas. If you look at the United Nations today, we have a wide range of conventions and treaties and declarations on trafficking, all of which have very narrow definitions and have reflected that period of time in which they were written. And yet what we find is they really don't apply today to the kind of dynamics that we're finding. And there's been an effort by the UN to try to identify some special rapporteurs, some working groups to try to explore a broader or more relevant definition for trafficking that we can use to help deal with the issues that we're faced with. And yet this is in process, and we don't really have a very clear, good working definition. And as a result, when we bring countries together or we bring non-government organizations or donors or communities together, we're often not talking the same language. And I think this is one of the biggest problems that we face with trafficking, is that we have all different images, and when we sit down together, we don't have a way to talk about it. At the same time, over 20 years, I think I've been working on this issue, I cannot find any communities or girls who have been trafficked who themselves identify themselves as a trafficked person. And if you talk to villagers, have you been trafficked? Has anybody here been trafficked? They would say immediately, no, not in our village. But if you ask them about vulnerabilities and migration, it's a completely different discussion that we have that follows. So I just want to preface our discussion today that this, I would argue, is probably the most important point when you start to talk about this issue, to just explore with one another what you're actually talking about and what images or what dynamics you're really exploring. What we see today is that migration is happening in the greatest numbers than we've ever seen in our time. There's over 215 million people who are living outside of their countries. That doesn't mean that they're all undocumented. It certainly doesn't mean they're all trafficked, but they're all moving, and in ways that we've never actually had to deal with in our world. And although both men and women are traveling and are moving, women are by far more vulnerable. And this is largely because most of women's work is in the informal economy, in markets, in agriculture, domestic work, babysitting, daycare. We see it in our country, you see it around the world, that many of the jobs that women hold are not in the formal labor sector. Also, much of women's work is informal, irregular. They're part-time work, they do piece work, number of pieces. In this example, the number of fish they serve, it's seasonal. They aren't often in the regular economy. They're often less educated. Their gender roles are more defined, and what we find in developing countries is they marry much earlier. They're also in conflict situations among refugees. 80% of all refugees, the millions of refugees that are in the world, are largely women and children. So women really do make up the majority of people who are at risk in the migration context. Today I'm going to focus on the work in Burma, and that's where I've spent, this keeps moving, sorry. The work in Burma, and that's where I've worked for the past 20 years. Although I've worked in Southeast Asia as a whole, Burma by far has had the most complex and difficult migration dynamics in the region. The reasons for that is that it's surrounded by the largest developing countries in the area, Thailand, India, China. And so there's a lot of opportunity outside their borders. It's an extremely poor country. There's been a lot of ethnic conflict and warfare for the past 50 years. And there are enormous ethnic minority populations around the country. There are 36 major ethnic minority populations and 136 if you count all the minor ethnic minorities. The vulnerabilities of ethnic minority communities, not speaking the major languages, not able to access health services or education in the countries where they live, is a big risk factor for people who are being trafficked today. Let me just jump back to say, although Eileen from the American Himalaya Foundation was unable to join us today, one of the ways that we started to collaborate in our work was that we both were on a panel, and we realized that the discussions and the presentations we were providing were almost identical, even though she focuses her work in Nepal. We could have used the same case examples, we could have used the same presentations, almost verbatim. And one of the things that I'd like to leave you with is the idea, to the understanding that these dynamics are really not country specific. It's amazing to me when I go around to speak or meet others who are working on these issues, the similarities in Eastern Europe, the similarities of Iraqi refugees who are fleeing to Syria and Jordan as illegal immigrants. You see these dynamics playing out all around the world. And so even though they couldn't be here today to present another case example, I think what I'll be able to present today will highlight very closely to what the realities they do on the ground. So what I'd like to talk a little bit about is these current dynamics of trafficking that I find happening in the 21st century, in the past 10 years, that are so different from how I started. In Southeast Asia, these are just the beginnings of the infrastructure of the roads that have been developed in the last 10 years. Prior to that, certainly 15 years ago, but for many countries as early as 10 years ago, all of these borders were locked. You couldn't travel across borders. And that has fueled not only migration, but trade, consumer goods, drug trafficking, a lot of issues that have emerged in the region have scaled up considerably as a result of all the infrastructure. But it's not only roads, it's also cell phones, it's a lot of infrastructure, electricity, with that comes access to the internet. All of the resources that have come in the past 10 years have really changed these communities dramatically. Say again? The roads, the new roads that have been built in the last 10 years, or linked across borders. And so now you see that young people, their dreams and aspirations are changing very quickly. They see the cell phones, they see the internet, they see the access of opportunities. Even though the absolute poverty has improved, the disparity between what they have in their villages and what they see in the cities is dramatic. And they want to be a part of it. They want to travel just like our kids do or our friends. They want the economic opportunities and security that they see others have around them. And they want to travel. They want to explore a world that's bigger than themselves. They want to move beyond the gender tradition roles that they've been told are the norm and are their expectations. And they want to do more in their life. Oh, these keep jumping ahead. But they're entering a global market that is looking for cheap labor. They're entering a global market that's trying to find the cheapest, race to the bottom for the cheapest workers. And they're entering an environment where they're promoting tourism. Governments are also encouraging exportation of labor, because by exporting labor, they're able to deal with the unemployment or underemployment in their country, and they're also able to obtain foreign exchange. The amount of remittances worldwide from people in developing countries sending money home is now, in 2011, reached $351 billion. That is more than 3 times all of the foreign development assistance that has gone to developing countries during that same period of time. And it's also almost about the same amount of money as direct investment in those countries. It is an enormous amount of money, and governments are promoting their nationals to go abroad to work. But when they recruit, people in these villages have no idea if this is a formal arrangement organized by the government or if this is a black market agent under the table who's going to bring across the border and give them a real job. They have no way to understand who's who. So in this context, they see opportunity, they want to go for it, and they have no idea how to decipher which is which. So I'd like to tell you a story. This is a village that I worked in for many, many years, and I have a daughter who's now 22, but at the time, this is about 15 years ago. We would go frequently to this village, and she got to know all of these children in this village. And she would often play this rubber band jump rope game with these girls, and they were very good at it, and she was always looked forward to it. So this is the last picture we had of them in the 4th grade. When we came back the next year, She ran off to find the friends, and they were all gone because they had all gone to get a job in the city, either in Bangkok and Kunming in China or over to India. She was living in Bangkok at the time and very excited, so she had run around to all of the houses to find out which girls had gone to Bangkok to get their addresses or their phone numbers so she could call them when she got home. And not any of the parent had a number or a contact for any of their kids. And this is the hole that they go into. And the question I always want to raise is, are these children trafficked? This is the dilemma. And if we only look at, quote, trafficking, we look at the end game, what happened to them. But this doesn't really solve the risk. And so somehow I feel we really need to start to turn it around, and we need to look at the vulnerabilities of these kids. And what do we need to do to make sure that if they want to move beyond their village, that they have the skills and the resources and the knowledge to be able to do so safely or with some opportunity for recourse or redress if they get in a vulnerable situation. If we just wait to define which one of these kids are trafficked, it's kind of too late. What we see happening on the borders where I work in Burma is that most of these young people are looking for jobs. When they cross the border, there's one area that I just went to recently, and I've been going for a number of years. And the Thai factories are building their factories right up along the border, just like we did with Mexico, right up along the border so we can get very cheap labor, half the price of Thai laborers, right along and these Burmese young people come up to the border to work, and there are about 4,000 or 5,000 who cross the border every morning, get in trucks, and go to the factories where they're sent to work, like day labor. You can really do anything you want to these young girls because they have no documentation, they have no rights, they're illegally in the country, and they're working under the table. And in that context, you can not pay them, you can pay them the whole amount, you can make them work all night, not work the next day, or take them further into another city and not let them return, and they have no way to negotiate that. And we see this dynamic over and over again. They live in really horrific conditions and very difficult labor conditions with very little protection of sanitation or the environment in which they work. And more of these young girls and the children of migrant workers are becoming stateless. They have no identification. They have no citizenship. And so they can't access health services in any country or education. They will be their whole life illegal. And if I did a report today, or if I really focus what I think is the most urgent issue, I would say it's this growing number of stateless children. Migrants having children abroad. The children are illegal because they're not legal in the country that they're in. They can't go back, or they're from ethnic minority communities that were never registered in the first place. And so they never had identity, and when they left, they can't go back with any identity. This population is significant and growing. And so in the end, they're illegal. And they can be deported, arrested at any point in time if the employer doesn't want to pay them. If the floods in Thailand, for example, now we blame migrants because we don't have enough jobs, so we're going to round them up and deport them. We have a whole dynamics of these things happening in our own country. And so we just round them up and deport them, and that somehow solves the problem. And the cycle just continues like this. I believe that the real way to change this is to try to think about what we can really do to empower the young girls and the young children, youth who are migrating. I think that the typical responses that we see in our media and that we see, and that I was very involved in the early years, shelters, prevention, trying to warn them about the dangers of migration, rescuing those who are in the brothels or in these horrible factories. trying to help them return, reintegrate back into their community. But what I've learned over the years is that keeps them in the position of a victim. It doesn't really help them with their life goals and their dreams and their aspirations for something beyond the village. What they really need is some life skills, some education, some resources and opportunities so that they can actually fulfill their aspirations to be more than marrying at 14 or 15 years old and following in their same traditional patterns that they've seen their mothers and generations before them. They want something else. And so I think that our typical responses to trafficking have to be challenged, and mine have been, to really emphasize a lot more working with these communities and with these young people who are at risk, working with those girls you saw in the picture about what they want to do, about what their conditions are in the workforce, what kind of jobs they want, studies, life skills that they hope to attain. Otherwise, they just have to pray each time and hope next time they migrate they'll have a better luck. And so what we've tried to focus on more and more is schools, both formal and informal schools. What we found is a lot of children don't go to school when they're young. And so by the time they're 12, 13, 14 years old, they can't go to the first grade. So you've got to start working with literacy programs, life skill programs, other informal courses or classes that can take place in the evening that can work with illiterate populations and build them into a program that reaches and meets their needs. There's a big challenge of trying to get schools to the remote rural areas, and especially to ethnic minority populations. They speak very isolated, small languages that aren't very common and very hard to find teachers who teach in those languages. They are very hard to get them to stop working during the daytime. They've got a lot of responsibilities to keep the family. A lot of them are married very young. What we find is that we need to do a lot to actually get them to school. What I see happening in some of the remote areas is that they're trying to prepare boarding schools for kids to come to stay in, so that they can stay Monday through Friday and not have to walk so far and actually attend the schools that are closer to the cities or the towns. This one that I just saw a few weeks ago, I mean, they set this up themselves, but obviously we should be doing more to support these kind of efforts by the community to keep their girls and young children in school. And in addition, I find over and over again people asking for preschools or pre-kindergarten programs. At first, I used to keep thinking, well, maybe don't we need to focus on primary school first or literacy first? And what I've learned is actually that the preschools are actually really key to getting the older siblings into school, to getting the parents working and employed so they don't have to ask their younger children to work in their place, to getting children literate and able to communicate in the national language so that when they go to school, they understand the language and have more likelihood to succeed. No, sure. I just have one more point and then I'll actually stop. But this is probably my last, so I can stop now. Go ahead.
You mentioned that preschools would encourage adults to get a job.
To work. You know, when the children go to school, the mothers are free to work, or they don't have to ask the older kids. The question was, how does that help parents be employed? So we found that actually school has been a very big, preschool and also alternative schools have been very important. And the American Himalaya Foundation also, both of us have really focused the majority of our work on schools, both formal and informal. And that we really need to work with the aspirations and the goals of the communities and those children, young adults, so that they can actually migrate, travel, move, take jobs, with some skills and some knowledge of their rights. So I think this is a very important, while at the same time negotiating an environment that respects their rights. And I think that's the challenge for us as outside of those communities, that we need to understand and struggle to understand the ongoing discourse on trafficking, how these issues are changing, how our policy of our government impacts those communities and the opportunities that young people are offered, our multinational corporations, the policies and rules that they practice when they're abroad. I think there's a number of considerations that we have to really be challenged by, and I'd like to leave you with these before I give the microphone to Paula. I think we have to be very aware of how we other others, and I do it all the time. But we see them somehow as different from us. And they're not any different than what my daughter wants. She wants to travel. She wants to see more than I did. She wants to have a world that's bigger than Bainbridge Island up in Washington. She wants something bigger than that. And so do these kids. And we have to really be careful. And parents want their children to stretch beyond what they know is possible. Because sometimes I get really frustrated when I see in the media and I hear people talking that somehow parents sold their kids, or they minimize it. And it's really not a very fair or empathetic understanding of the context with which they're trying to raise their children. I think we also have to work to increase our own tolerance and understanding of cultures and the different practices. It's very difficult. It's very difficult for me. Like I said, I was just able to travel in Burma the last month, and a lot of girls are marrying at 14 and 15 years old. It's very hard to work with this. It's hard to see these young kids. And yet, you can't have a simplistic answer to this and expect change. That you really need to communicate, listen to the issues, and work with families and communities on these issues. I think there needs to be basic labor rights, even for people who don't have legal status. We have to do it in our own country, and we have to do it around the world. You can't really be an illegal person. You have some basic rights, no matter where you are. And I think it's important to recognize and work towards formalizing women's work, domestic workers, babysitters, in the markets. We have a lot of informal work, farm workers, that is not recognized as formal labor, even again in our own country. And I think we should focus on this labor exploitation and not on controlling movements of people. Focusing this problem on keeping people in one place and not allowing them to move is what results in this cycle of deportation and illegal, hidden dynamics that people can't get out of. And we have to recognize that we have large unmet labor needs, and that we are going around the world trying to find cheaper markets, and that we need to look at how these practices take place and how to protect and promote a fair labor exchange. I was just in Burma the last month, and I suppose some of you may know that the country's slowly opening up, and you could not believe how many multinational companies are descending in weeks on this place and trying to set up their factories, because this is 60 million people with no work, very cheap labor. And if we don't have some mechanisms with which we can monitor and protect and promote their rights, then this cycle only continues at an even more rapid pace than we see today. And I think we need to hear and work with communities on the ground to meet their needs. As I mentioned earlier, none of these communities see themselves or any of the young people in their communities as being trafficked. That discourse is not theirs. So if we want to really deal with these issues, we're going to have to really talk in a language and listen to the concerns and the realities that they perceive in their communities in order to change these dynamics. So I'd like to leave this with you with some of the things that I struggle with in the field. And I would like my colleague Paula Bock, who works very closely with me, to talk to you a little bit about what she does on this end to complement that work. Thanks.
Hi, my name's Paula Bock, and I work on community communications and development. So that's telling the stories of the people in Burma and along its borders, and helping to get support. I want to tell you a little bit about how I got involved and then how, if you're interested, you can get involved. So not too long ago, I was a journalist. I had a long career as a journalist, but I also had a secret life. And that was volunteering with my husband, who's a doctor, at a refugee clinic run by a really amazing woman refugee doctor. And while we were there, this was back in 1996, we crossed the border from Thailand in a pickup truck at night, over the hills, to a little village in rebel-controlled Burma where they hadn't seen a pediatrician in years. And I, fell in love with the children, playing with them. And these are two of the girls, Shua and Omu. And they're just, all the kids were really delightful. These two were good friends in particular. And in fact, they were in preschool. So you heard about the importance of preschools, and they used to sing the ABC song. Anyway, after my year off, I had taken a sabbatical from my job, ended, we came back to Seattle, where we live. And then I found out that a few months that the village had fallen to the military. So I was just, my heart, that something had happened. So I tried to, I convinced the newspaper to send me back on a special assignment. And I was trying to find the girls. I didn't tell the newspaper that. I said I was going to write about the civil war in Burma. And I couldn't get to them because there was this war. But over the years, I kept trying to get contact, and I would hear things. And, as they grew up, what do you think would happen? Their village was occupied by enemy soldiers, right? They were very poor. One of them was an orphan. So all these factors made them so vulnerable. And like so many other girls, so vulnerable. Would they leave the village to try to find work? Would the soldiers try to take advantage of them? What would happen? So what happened was actually a really good thing. After several years, they were both able to get out of the village and get into a boarding school. And so now they're like 20, around 19, 20. One wants to be a teacher and the other wants to be a doctor. So it's like, oh, yeah, that's a great story. But there are 43 million people like them who are displaced still. I mean, those are 2 of 43 million who had a good story. And so that is why I thought, got to do more. And so anyway, so I got more involved. And I was here in America, what can you do here? I got involved with a little group, and we did like raffles and all kinds of things like that. I took ESL courses, and then I would ESL tutoring, and I went over and I tutored. I taught aerobics to refugee medics over there. And in America, went and told people about Burma. I wrote about it. Those happen to be my skill sets. You have other skill sets. So here are just some 12 ways to get involved if you're interested. Share your expertise. I know a lot of people have expertise here in technology. One of our colleagues is doing a really interesting project, trying to get it off the ground with using phones, interactive voice recognition to provide healthcare information to people on the move. So that could be trafficked or migrant people. Many of them are illiterate, so it's great to get that information about malaria and reproductive health over the phone. But there's solar-powered phones. There's a lot going on with that. Something simple for you as setting up and training using Google Apps and other Google tools at our organization, and this is both in the States here and with our local partners. I mean, we touch the Google tools and use them so clumsily. So just to have somebody kind of hold our hand and say, okay, here are your needs. You should really be using this, and this is how you do it. SEO optimization, graphic design. If there's a website wizard or goddess who could help, we use Drupal, that would be great. And this would not just with our organization, but any organization that does this kind of thing. Share with your friends. Learn about trafficking or women and girls, whatever your passion is, Burma, Nepal, and share that with your friends. Host conversations, post, blog, talk about it, engage your network. We have wonderful supporters and donors who do, one did a bakery, a baking book. They've done craft things. it doesn't really matter what it is. The idea is to engage. One of our supporters is a Broadway producer, and she had like a Broadway bash. So it just depends on your expertise and your contacts. Donations are always welcome, and I know there's an employee matching gift, so that's helpful. Online friend-to-friend fundraising, we're starting to do that, and if you spend a lot of time online and with your communities online, that might be something to get involved with. And then there's also travel to broaden your horizons and look for volunteer opportunities. So thank you very much. And there's our information.
Questions and answers.
Yes.
People also listening in want to ask questions. Feel free. Use the word trafficking.
The word itself, or they don't identify as an experience. Then I used to think about vulnerability, then I said, oh yeah, so what is it that they don't identify as?
Okay, just let me repeat it for the people who are listening in. She was asking why is it that people don't identify with the word trafficking? Is it the experience of trafficking itself or just the word? Is that pretty much? So I would say that it's a little bit of both. They don't have that word, of course, in their vocabulary, so that doesn't make sense. And if you translate, it doesn't really work. But they also don't have the concept. I mean, if anybody have been fortunate enough to travel in some of these really remote areas, the trust and the kindness, the generosity is so amazing. So they just don't believe people would take advantage of anybody to that extent. I think they really fundamentally don't believe that. They wouldn't have it in their worldview. But even when they face migration, then I think that there's another issue. When it does happen, there's so much shame, especially for the girls, that when they come back, they would never talk about it. So it perpetuates that cycle. When you talk about vulnerabilities, it's a little bit less personal. It happens to everybody in different contexts. So people feel a little bit more comfortable to talk about the vulnerabilities, and certainly of other people, maybe not of themselves. But even in that context, I just don't feel that trafficking, and certainly the trafficking, because we ourselves don't even know what we're talking when we use that word. They themselves also are very confused by it. But migration is much more concrete. People are moving, there are risks, things happen. It's much more concrete, obvious to them what we're talking about. So it's a combination of the two, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Yes, please.
I really love hearing about education and intervention for people. My experience has been that fundamental layer of education, a lot of people change, long term, the lack of jobs, which is something that's so out of control and a big threat.
Yes, yes. She's asking about education's great, but then there's a void, there's a lack of jobs that people face when they actually do finish school or become literate. And I think that's very much a reality. I think the whole effort to do livelihoods and to try to work with women and find other alternative to employment is very critical. And I think that there are opportunities, people are working on it. The infrastructure of the new roads, these are the positive things of that. It's bringing more jobs. It's bringing a way to sell their produce. It's bringing markets. You see people in remote areas on this last trip sewing handbags, things that they can sell in the market that wasn't there before. So, the development to the infrastructure isn't only bad. It just brings new dynamics. And some of the positive parts of it does bring new markets. So, yes, that's an ongoing challenge, and there are ongoing struggles to try to find ways that they can be employed. Yes, please.
I also just need this statement
Tell me the name again, sorry.
again.
Okay.
You need this statement that if meals were stopping violence against women or about violence really tough. So
Okay, the question was that, I'll just make it short if you don't, but what can men do? And if men had a different attitude, wouldn't some of this change? And I would say it's, yes, say it's two ways. One of the ways, in the beginning, we focused way too much on women and girls. And I think what we're learning too is that this is a dynamic and something that affects the whole community. So I'd say it's both ways. I think we too as organizations have to see this as a community issue. And I think for men, I think it's important for them to speak to women's rights. And you know, what's always the hardest for me is the girls that I work with, especially the girls, their self-esteem is so low that they actually believe that it's their fault that this has happened. So I think, you know, promoting and speaking to women about girls and about women in a positive, I think that happens in our day-to-day life. One of the most disturbing things for me is when Western travelers go to Asia, and they are really awful tourists, quite frankly. It's just disrespectful. And I think, and then even for myself as a woman, I don't stand up to it as much as I should. Sometimes you should really say something. And I think for men to say it to other men, or at least not to participate, to be, you know, not other and to put yourself in that context, I think we all have a lot of challenges in how we other people. And I would say that both in our context and also when we look abroad, that's a challenge. And
So with respect to education, I would think that trying to convey more focus
yes, yes. Yeah, and that's where I think we need to grow as an organization. What we've been trying to do in the last few years, but we were very slow to approach it that way. And if I could turn back the time and the clock, I would have done that much earlier, because I think it's fundamental to changing these dynamics. But, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, he said that, you know, wouldn't it be better if we got boys in the schools involved in women's issues, or girls' issues and rights of the female child, and to be more respectful of one another. And I agreed, and I thought we should have actually been doing that much sooner than we have. Just in the last few years, we start to see these programs as being co-ed for both boys and girls, instead of pulling the girls aside and working on these issues just with female children. To Burma, yeah. Yeah, one of the things that we do, maybe it might be why you asked this question, I'm not sure, but we do a lot of very, very small grants to community leaders. And, to repeat the question, sorry. What can you do to promote role models of women, strong women role models for girls? Is that pretty accurate? And what's possible to do that in those communities? And one of the things that we've been doing a lot of is trying to do very, very small grants to women in those communities to take a leadership role, to get organized girls, to get involved, to do livelihood projects, to take a more prominent role in their community. And a lot of that is just small grants. You know, we've been actually reading a very interesting book I would encourage you to read called Positive Deviance, to look at women in those communities who are taking small risks in their community to do something different, to make a difference, and to build on that. Not to bring it in from the outside or a program in from the outside, but see what they're doing already in those communities. This is a book we've been reading in our program team, and it's been very inspirational. We just shared it with parts of it with a number of our partners in the field and translated into several languages. It's a very, very thought-provoking approach to development that I'd encourage you to take a look at. Yeah, the saving circles that we've done, actually, a lot of them with people who are HIV positive and have been ostracized in their community, but ways to get them organized and to work with each other, not only, but also with some women's groups. But they're very small, and it's actually very difficult to do because no big philanthropy or donor or even international organization wants to give out an $8,000 grant. And it's very hard to monitor that. So to set up networks in the communities or in the country where that's possible. So you give a big grant, and then that network can give out smaller grants. But you have to set up something that's different than the model we currently have for development to make those kind of small differences work. Yeah. Yeah. So the question is, how do we recover, or how do we know if people have been able to be tracked or returned home after they've been sent abroad, or after they've gone to look for work or possibly been trafficked? And I would say it's incredibly difficult. The most that we can do is work on both sides. We work both on the China side of the border and the Burma side, the Thai side and the Burma side. And through those networks, we can try to track, but it's very, very difficult. And we have families and parents who have been waiting for their kids for years. And, I just actually last week met a woman who's waiting for her husband to return yet. She hasn't heard from him in 3 years. So there's no idea if he's gone off on a fishing boat and not been allowed to come back to land, or he's been put in a factory, or he died, or she may never know. This happens a lot, and it's very difficult to track, unfortunately. She's asking, and reintegrating back home, and do you see them being trafficked again or moving again? And I think it's a vicious cycle. I think once they've gone abroad, they come back. It's very difficult to return home. There's still no jobs there. And that's why I showed that picture of them praying at the shrine. They think, okay, next I'll have a good prayer, and next time hopefully I won't have such bad luck, or I'll have better luck, and I'll try again. And this cycle just goes on and on. And the other thing we were talking about at lunch just before I came is also, it's very difficult for people to get remittances to send their money back home. And this is one of the things we were talking about with the new cell phone banking. That's very exciting, because possibly if they could remit their money back home, send it home safely, instead now they're carrying it all on their body. So everybody knows they have all the money, so they're ripped off all the time. Constantly. So they end up back home with nothing, and this starts all over again. And sometimes I really believe if we could get a safe way for that money to get home, they could actually start a small business, or they'd have some capital to do something. But because we don't have that set up very easily, the banking system's so weak, there's no banks in these rural areas, there's not a remittance system, and so the cycle just keeps going on and on again. It's very hard to break it.
Really inspiring to hear about how your organization is helping, also about how Rose is helping. Are there any other projects like that that are helping move forward in schools, and any other projects that you're actually kind of tracking?
So she's asking if there's any other development projects that are also helping us or helping all of us deal with this issue, like roads or cell phones, banking. All of it has pros and cons. But I would say one of the things I often tell people is, even in these villages, almost every village I showed you, all of those kids they all have access to a cell phone. Somebody's got a cell phone. They don't have electricity, but they use the solar-powered something, and they've got access to a cell phone. And a lot of those communities have Gmail accounts. Those kids give me their Gmail accounts. Now, they have no internet, but they know the Gmail's out there. And either somebody set them up an account, or somebody will come through with a smartphone and let them rent the access to the smartphone for a couple minutes or hours. Even up in the northern borders of Shan State, the northern Burma with China, kids are giving me their Gmail accounts. So I think it's exciting, and there's opportunities. Even with our partners, I can G-talk with them. Development's changed completely since 30 years ago, when I went out to a remote area and you'd send a telex every month on how things are going. It's exciting. There's a lot of opportunity. At the same time, there's also a lot of risk, a lot of opportunities that these young people don't know how to evaluate or understand or be savvy with. They don't have the worldview to be able to move with this technology safely. So it's a mixed, I think it's the same things that are positive or also have their challenges. Mhm.
So with providing apps that they can actually learn, but it's the language there.
Most of them are illiterate. This is why Paula was mentioning one of these things with voice recognition, that they're thinking of trying to do some healthcare services with voice recognition. That's so interesting. Yeah. Say again one more time. The question is, are we working with partners to utilize Google Apps more effectively? And the answer is, we're trying to learn how to utilize Google Apps. I think our partners really want it. They're asking us all the time. We come from the development world, so a lot of this is trying to find new partners, even in our own organization or in the countries also, that can help us learn and move with the opportunities that exist.
So the word partner, and our name is Community Partners, just to clarify. Our indigenous partners are in Asia.
That was a great question about partners, and I just want to clarify, as our name is Community Partners International, we have Indigenous partners, over 100 Indigenous partners who, they're local people, and they work with the communities to improve healthcare, to improve education, and that, so we call them our partners. Are some of them on Google Apps? I know at least one of them is. And then our partners, like partners who help us and provide pro bono services. For example, our website was set up by a wonderful partner who works with Tiffany Asia. So we need a partner to help us with do our Google Apps because we're doing it so clumsily. But yes, we would love that. Oh, you do? Yeah. Okay. Oh, wow. Oh, that would be wonderful. Thank you. Yes, yes. Thanks.
I think partly because we don't know it so well, it's very difficult for us to help the people in the field think about how to use it. And sometimes now with all the people coming into, for Burma, for example, but you could talk about other countries as well. It's very hard to see our partners who've worked there in very, very difficult circumstances for so many years. They're being overwhelmed by all these international organizations who come in, and they've got the websites, they have all the resources, they know how to use all these tools, and our partners lose their voice because they don't know how to enter and engage in that. And I think we really need some people who have different skill sets than we have to work with them. Yeah. So the question was, do you see a generation gap between the younger generation and their aspirations and what the parents and their traditions? And I would say certainly yes, but I would say that most of the parents still encourage their children. They're very proud of their children when they go abroad and go to work. They're very honored, but they don't consider all the changes that are going to happen. So when they come back changed and not respecting the traditions, then the conflicts arise. But they're caught. And at the same time, if they bring home some money and they have a new aluminum roof and some new things in the house, they're very proud. So it's a conflict, I think, and maybe not also different than our own families. But I think but they are very proud when their children go abroad, that they're working in another country, that they're learning another language, that they've traveled beyond. But at the same time, when they come home, there's terrible clashes, actually. Okay, it's time. So anyway, thank you very much. It was great questions. It was really wonderful to be able to come here. Thanks.